welcome to my August wrap up. I'm really excited because in August I finished 6 books. I had a few rereads, I had some 5 stars, and I'm looking forward to talking about them. So the first book that I finished in August is the first Trials of Apollo book called The Hidden Oracle, and this one follows the god Apollo as he gets cast out of Olympus by Zeus because of various things he's done in the past that he needs to repent for, and also the oracles of Delphi aren't working. He's now a 16-year-old boy called Lester Papadopoulos. He goes to Camp Half-Blood. Therein begins the quests, the heroes, the characters that we have experienced in the past 2 series by Rick Riordan. So I love seeing the recurring characters. But as far as this one goes, I gave it a 4 stars. And even though, it was a reread for me, I knew what I was in for, but I read this one and I was still frustrated by Apollo because obviously he used to be a god. So his character needs a bit of hardship almost and a bit of a reality check. And it's hardest to read about him in this book, but he mellows a lot more across the rest of the series. And I do like the side character Meg that is introduced in this story because, you can't just have one sole character. You've usually got a bunch to balance each other out. And Meg, while she is impulsive and passionate, I also find her a bit annoying as a character. So both of them are kind of annoying, but as the series progresses, they get more palatable, I guess. So I did the hard yards, which are not really hard yards, because I gave this 4 stars and I enjoyed myself. And it's a pretty quick audiobook, so it was great to get me headfirst back into this series again. And then I read a high epic Roman-inspired fantasy book that has been getting a lot of hype lately, and that is The Will of the Many by James Islington. I was walking around the house completely destitute after finishing this book because it was a new 5-star read, and then I flipped to the back of the book where the author bio is, and I realised that he lives in the same state of Australia that I live, but I also feel like I need to somehow appear on his doorstep and demand answers because I love this book so much. So we're following Viz, and he's about 17, 18, and he's a prison guard at the start of the book. The hierarchy as a social power, they enforce people to give over their will, so it's called ceding their will, C-E-D-I-N-G, and that is a form of a magic system where your energy and life force gets fed into the hierarchy, and the higher up the hierarchy you go, the physically stronger people are. So it's almost like the more powerful have literally been able to manifest physical power as well. And Viz is hiding away being a prison guard because he has never ceded will before in his life and he does not want to start now. But on his 18th birthday, the hierarchy naturally track him down and force him to do this. So he's trying to figure out a way and save up some money to get out of the hierarchy, out of their reach of power, and away from everyone so he doesn't have to cede his will. But he gets caught up in a plot. He goes to this academy because there was a murder there. There's some questionable political things going on as well, and he's the only one that can potentially get into this academy because usually it is will locked, which means that no one can easily get into the doors. So he's part of this plot to uncover this mystery at the academy, and the stakes in each third of this book just got more and more intense to the point where I was literally holding my breath reading some of the ending. It was awesome. It just slapped me across the face at the end, like, oh yeah, I'm done now. And I was like, where are the rest of the pages? I need more. So this was a stellar 5-star book. I will recommend it until the cows come home. It completely lived up to the hype for me. And now I'm just going to be destitute waiting for, I think, May next year, which is when the sequel comes out. I'm not going to survive. And then it's been a long time, but I actually got sent an ARC copy, which is an advanced reading copy of a book. And this comes out on the 10th of September. It is a fantasy following Myra and Scarlett. And Myra has grown up her whole life. Well, I mean, she's 18 and she's been on the run with her mum, but her mum has never explained why they're actually on the run. And then one day when Myra decides to join the trials to become, I think, a King's Guard or something similar, everything changes her life as we know it. That's Myra's story. Eventually there is crossover with Scarlett, and Scarlett is a princess, and Scarlett is politically ostracized. Her father hates her. Her siblings have tried killing her in the past, and that's because she is a half princess to this throne, and the half race that she's part of are very much ostracized by the kingdom. So she's trying to cut her own space out in this court, and to do that she's got to make a lot of enemies and unlikely friends, and her and Myra cross over. Initially I thought this was a fantasy romance because that's what I thought the marketing was aiming at, but it's more of a family-fueled political intrigue because Scarlett and Myra are not love interests. There are love interests for each of them, so it's not a sapphic romance like I thought. So that was a little bit disappointing, but I did like the writing style style, and I was quite impressed given that this is a debut. To take on a fantasy like this with a lot of political intrigue as your debut novel, that is an undertaking. So I was quite impressed, but I was held back a little bit because it felt like it lacked some emotional intimacy and it was moving through the dialogue and the plot pretty quickly. So, I mean, I understood the characters and their story arcs, but I wasn't particularly emotionally invested. So technically there was emotion there, but I just didn't feel like I was connected to it. It was also a clever plot, but it somehow felt a bit too convoluted at times. Also, there was a moment where I was like, that is disgusting, because something happened that was quite traumatic for one of the main characters and she vomited. And I'm like, well, that's an understandable reaction to this thing that has just happened. Shortly after she vomited, her love interest came over and kissed her. To be fair, it was believable in terms of its connection and the emotional impact of the scene, but the kiss was just what threw me a little. But anyway, overall, I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars. And then I finally finished a non-fiction. I've been trying to read more during 2024, and I made a video about some good non-fiction, so I'll link that down below for you. But I finished The Body Keeps the Score, and this one is about how people who have undergone stress and trauma tend to hold it in their bodies, and the way psychology has been approached in modern day is if you sit down and talk about it, then it will be resolved. Whereas with trauma patients, it's not as simple as that, because rehashing the trauma is almost emotionally and mentally the same as reliving that trauma. So it was an intense case study discussion about this particular MD and his experiences across decades about how he's been involved in trauma diagnoses and discussing and understanding patients and their care. And so it was a fascinating nonfiction, but it also felt a little bit dry sometimes, and it felt like it was a little bit too long. So while I did enjoy it, even though it was a very heavy subject, I would say read it to get the basic message of mental health, trauma, and its impact to the body across. But I wonder if there are other titles that are potentially a bit shorter that you can read in this subject matter. I'm still very new to nonfiction, and I know that The Body Keeps the Score is quite a big key player in the nonfiction space. So I feel like I need to branch a little bit more into nonfiction to understand this topic a little bit more. I've also heard potentially that this author is not the best of people, but I'm not really sure why. So I have to go and do some Googling about that. I'm not really sure of the background. So I'm hoping that this audiobook that I spent hours on, I don't regret doing. But yeah, I also don't rate my nonfiction. So I finished this book and I'm happy I did that. Now, next up, I've got a 5-star book, which is amazing because The Will of the Many was a 5-star book. It has taken me 8 months of the year to find 2 more 5-star reads, which is just nuts. Anyway, I finished a series and I don't really know how to process this, but anyway, I read Brother Song, and this is the final book in the Green Creek or the Wolfsong series by TJ Klune. These are the books by TJ Klune that I will die on this hill of saying they are the best thing ever. And I can't tell you the plot of this, but just know that I was not okay when I was reading this, as the evidence will show you. I cried 12 times reading this book, and it was an experience I would definitely repeat. So this series in general, I'll talk a bit about Wolfsong because I can't talk about this one, but Wolfsong follows Ox and Joe, and Ox is growing up in the small town of Green Creek, and at the very beginning of the book, his father leaves him and his mother, just abandons them. And at the beginning of Wolfsong, the family called the Bennetts move in across the road from Ox and his mother. After being unmoored and needing a bit more direction in their lives after the father has left, he left a trail of abuse behind him as well. So they're trying to heal and become better versions of themselves now that he's gone. And then Ox meets Joe, one of the Bennetts that has moved in across the road from him. And it turns out later that the Bennetts are actually werewolves. And so it's a supernatural male-male romance, but the romance is very much the subplot for what is happening with Ox's character growth and what is going on politically that will potentially threaten the Bennett family. This story just follows beautiful connections, and I love Ox's involvement in their world, and I just have so many big feelings about this series. And the writing style can seem potentially repetitive, and while people might find that annoying, surprisingly for this series it just works for me. It's a great stylistic choice, and it really hits home about what these characters are thinking, what their core messages are, and what their core beliefs are, and how they support each other. So I think it's beautiful. 5 out of 5 stars. I can't wait to reread this series and be destroyed all over again. And then I read The Phoenix Keeper on audiobook, and I have a separate review for that, so I'll also link it down below. It's a very short review, like 4 minutes long, and so I won't talk too much about it, but The Phoenix Keeper is a cozy fantasy set in a magical zoo. It had great discussions about conserving natural species, and that was Ayla's whole focus of this book, so it followed her as a character study and character growth because it's a cozy fantasy book rather than an epic fantasy that has a lot of external influencing factors. So Ayla's goal in life is breeding phoenixes. She loves the phoenix exhibit that she is working in It's her heart and soul, and the breeding program is on the fritz. So she wants to try and reinvigorate it. At the same time, she's got a crush on this guy who is one of the other zookeepers for the dragons, and she also has a perceived rivalry with the griffin keeper Lysiana. So there's a whole subplot there of potential romance that's going on, and it is a sapphic romance. And I just really enjoyed this one, and it surprised me because as I was reading it, I was like, yeah, this can keep going. Like, I'm not disliking it, I'm not loving it, like I'm kind of coasting, it's great. And then it got to a point almost like halfway or just past halfway of this book, and I was like, ooh, I am suddenly quite emotional. These characters have grown on me and I did not expect it. So I ended up giving it 4 stars and I really enjoyed it. And now I've only got 2 more books to talk about. One of them I've recently just finished, and then the other one I'm currently reading. So the one that I have just finished reading is The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. This was one of my anticipated releases for August, and I just finished it yesterday. And this one follows Theo and Kit, and they were childhood best friends. They dated for a while and they broke up. But then before they broke up, they ended up booking a trip through Europe that was food and wine tasting. But because they broke up and they're now estranged exes and they haven't talked for 4 years, they never ended up going on the trip, and they just kept putting it off and like redeeming it for as long as it could go. But now they can't redeem it anymore, and so both of them accidentally had the same idea, and they have decided to go on the trip together but separately, and they both appear and run into each other on the same tour bus. And now they're like, oh no, I have to spend the next several weeks with this person that I thought I had cut out of my life. Initially when I was starting this, I thought that it might have been built on a miscommunication, but as we got further into the story, I really respected and understood the different ways the characters were coming back to each other and their backgrounds and reasoning why. You got a little bit of a description and then a lot more later on, but I wish it came a bit earlier, and they start a bet with each other of who can sleep with the most people on the tour, and Theo proposes it and Kit agrees, and Kit agrees because he just wants to keep talking to Theo. It's also worth mentioning that, I mean, there were hints throughout the beginning of the book that I just apparently ignored, that Theo is non-binary, so it is not a male-male romance like has been marketed. I just wanted to clear that up in case you go into this with different expectations, because I went in with varied expectations and then I had to kind of get my footing back under me halfway through the book. So I did like it, I gave it 4 stars, but I also felt a deep melancholy about this story, and I think that's because I was feeling the tragedy of the characters. It's like they were grieving their past selves and the gap they had of that 4 years where they didn't know each other, and it was a connection to art and culture and food and a reigniting of their trust and their friendship throughout this book. So it was bittersweet in a way, and it was very clever in the way that it brought all of that to the reader's attention, but it was also just sad. So it made me feel a little bit weird emotionally, and now I'm not sure of what my reading vibe is, but I still gave it 4 stars. And so that concludes the books that I've actually read during the month of August, but I wanted to talk about what I'm currently reading because she is huge. And that is The Words of Radiance, and I have read in part 1 a fair bit now, but I'm still not, I'm not even halfway. Like, this is part 1, I've got part 2, and I haven't even finished part 1 yet. So that tells you I'm not even 50% through the book, but I'm still loving it. I've got 10 hours of the audiobook left, and I am making the fastest headway that I possibly can, because to reread this before the 5th book, Nights of Wind and Truth, comes out in December, I need to reread the rest of them too, and they're all 1,000 pages. So I am terrified, but doing my best. So that is my ongoing goal, but I talk about stuff like that in my What I'm Currently Reading videos, or What I'm Reading Right Now videos, which I post weekly. So I'll link the playlist in the description so you can track my progress and I guess my panic until December. But that is all that I have read or I'm currently reading in August. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll come chat to you down below in the comments, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.